Good evening. You may call me the Chevalier. I will be reading to help anybody fall asleep who wants a bedtime story but sadly does not have anybody there to read for them. This is Bedtime Stories for Little People. Once again, I will give a quick reminder of self-care. Please make sure that you take time every day to meditate and relax and just let any stress or worry that you are feeling fall away. That said, I hope everybody is nice and snuggly in their bed and ready to be read to. The first story I will read tonight, once again, is another classic one you may know. I will be reading Rapunzel from the Brothers Grimm. There once lived a man and his wife, who long wished for a child, but in vain. There was the back of their house a little window, which overlooked a very beautiful garden of the finest vegetables and flowers. But there was a high wall around it, and no one could venture into it, for it belonged to a great witch of great might, and of whom all the world was afraid. One day, when the wife was standing from the window looking at the garden, she saw a bed filled with the finest rapapun, and it looked so fresh and green, she began to wish for some. At great length she longed for it so greatly, and went on for days and days. She knew she could not get the rampion. She pined away, and grew pale and miserable. And the man was uneasy, and said to his wife, "What's the matter, dear?" "Oh," she said, "I'll die unless I can get some of that which grows in the garden at the back of our house." The man, who loved her very, very much, thought to himself, "Rather than lose my wife, I will have to go steal some of that, at whatever the cost may be." And in the twilight he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, and plucked hastily as much of it as he could and brought to his wife. She made a salad of it at once, and ate it to her heart's content. But she liked it so much, and it tasted so good, the very next day she longed for it 3 times even more. And then she was to say that the man must climb over the wall once more. And when he went in twilight again, he was climbing back, he saw all at once the witch was standing waiting for him, and was trembly frightened. She cried with her angry eyes, "How dare you climb over to my wall like a thief, to steal my rampion? It will be worse on you." "Oh," he answered, "be merciful, please. I just have only done what was necessary, for my wife saw this out the window, and she possessed a great longing for it, and would die if she could not have some to eat." And the witch said, "If that is all you say, you have as much as you can want, as one condition. The child that will come into this world must be given to me. It shall go well with the child, and I will care for her as if I were her real mother." In distress, the man promised everything. And when the time came and the child was born, the witch appeared, and giving the name of the child Rapunzel, which is the same as rampion, and she took it away with her. Rapunzel was the most beautiful child in all the world, and when she was 12 years old, the witch shut her up in a tall tower in the midst of the woods, and it had neither door nor step, only a small window above. And when the witch went to visit Rapunzel, she would stand below and cry, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And Rapunzel had the most beautiful long hair that shone like gold. And when she heard the voice of the witch, she would unfasten her hair to an upper window, unbind it with and it would let it down 20 ells below, and the witch would climb upon it as if it were a rope. And after this they lived such for many few years. It happened that a king's son was riding through the wood one day, and he saw the tower, and as he drew near he heard the voice singing so sweetly that he stood and listened. It was Rapunzel, in her loneliness, trying to pass the time away, and she would sing sweet songs to herself. The king's son wished to go to her, and sought to find the door to the tower, but there seemed to be none. And so he rode, but the songs had entered into his heart, and every day he would go to the wood and listen to her sing. One time, when he was standing under a tree, he saw the witch come up, and he listened closely as she called out, "Oh, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And then he saw how Rapunzel let down her long tress, and how the witch would climb up, and went to her. And then he said to himself, "Since that is the ladder, I will climb it, and I will seek my fortune." And the next day, as soon as Rapunzel, as soon as it began to grow dusk, he went to the tower and cried, "Oh, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." As he let down her hair, and the king's son climbed up upon it. Rapunzel was greatly terrified when she saw that a man had come into her, for she had never seen one before. But the king's son began speaking so kindly to her, and told her how her singing had entered his heart, and so that he would have no peace until he had seen her himself. Rapunzel then forgot her terror, and when she asked her to take him for a husband, she saw that he was young and beautiful, and she thought to herself, "I certainly like him much better than old Mother Gothel." And she put her hand into his hand, saying, "I will willingly go with you, but I do not know how I will get out. When you come and bring me a silken rope, and I will make a ladder, and then it will be quite ready that I will be able to climb down out of the tower, and then we will ride away on your horse." They agreed, and he soon came back with everything in the evening, as the old woman came in one day. And the witch knew nothing of this, until old Rapunzel said to her unwittingly, "Mother Gothel, how is it you climb up here so slowly? The king's son is with me in just a moment." "Oh, wicked child," she cried, "what is this I hear? I thought I had hidden you away from all the world, but you have betrayed me." In her anger she seized Rapunzel by her hair, and struck it several times with her hair, and grasping a pair of shears, right then and there, snip, 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 all the beautiful locks were laying on the ground. And she was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel and put her away in a deep desert, where she lived in great misery and woe. The same day on which she took Rapunzel away, she went back to the tower in the evening, and made fast the severed locks of hair in the window. And when the king came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let down the hair to him, and the king's son climbed up. But instead of his dearest Rapunzel, he saw the witch looking for him, with glittering eyes. "Ah!" she cried, mocking him, "you came for my dear darling? But the sweet bird no longer sits here in the nest, and sings no more. The cat has got her, and will scratch your eyes out as well. Rapunzel is lost to you, and you will see her no more." The king's son was beside himself with grief and agony. He sprang from the tower, but when he escaped with his life, the thorns which were around the bottom of the tower fell into his eyes, and he wandered so blind in the wood, eating nothing but roots and berries, doing nothing but lament and weep for his lost dearest wife. He wandered for several years in misery, until at last he came to the desert where Rapunzel was living, with her two twin children that she had bore, a boy and a girl. At first he heard the voice that he thought he knew, and when he reached the place from which it opened, it seemed to have come to him. Rapunzel knew him, and she fell on his neck and wept. And when her tears touched his eyes, they began to clear again, and he could once again be able to see. He then took her to the kingdom, where they were both received with great joy, and they lived there happily ever after. Next, I will read one you probably never have heard of. It is called One Eye, Two Eye, Three Eye. There once was a woman who had 3 daughters, the eldest of whom was called One Eye, because she simply had one eye in the middle of her forehead. The second, Two Eyes, because she had 2 eyes like all other folk. The youngest was known as Three Eyes, because she had 3 eyes, the third one being in the center of her forehead. However, as Two Eyes was just as any other human, her sisters and mother would not endure her. They said to her thusly, "Because you have 2 eyes, you are no better than common people, and thou do not belong to us." They pushed her about and threw her old clothes, and gave her nothing to eat but leftovers, and did everything they could to make her life unhappy. It came to pass that Two Eyes would go into the fields and tend the goats that were still quite hungry because she was still quite hungry because her sisters had given her so little to eat. She sat down on the ridge and began to weep so bitterly that two streams came down from her eyes. And at once she looked up in grief. A woman was standing there beside her. "Why art thou weeping, Two Eyes?" And Two Eyes answered, "I have not reason to weep, because I have two eyes like other people. My sister and mother all hate me for it, and push me around from one corner to another. They throw old clothes at me and give me nothing to eat but scraps. Today they have given me so little that I am still quite hungry." And then the wise woman said, "Wipe your tears away, Two Eyes, and I will tell thee something to stop thee from ever suffering from hunger again. Just say to thy goat, 'Bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat.' And then a clean, well-spread table will stand before thee, with the most delicious foods, on which you may eat, and thou that you are craving. And when thou hast had enough, and there is no more need for the little table, say, 'Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away.' And then it will vanish from thy sight." And hereupon the wise woman departed. And Two Eyes thought, "I must instantly make a trial of this, and see if it is true, for I am quite very hungry," she said. "Bleat, bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat." And scarcely had she spoke the words, but a little table appeared, with white cloth standing, and there was a plate with knife and fork and silver spoon, and the most delicious food was there, and it was also warm and smoking as if it had just come fresh from the kitchen. And then Two Eyes said the shortest prayer she knew, and helped herself to some food, and enjoyed it. And when she was satisfied, she said just as the wise woman had taught her, "Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take this table quite away." And immediately the little table and everything was gone again. "It is a delightful way of keeping house," said Two Eyes, and she was quite glad and happy. In the evening she went home with her goat, and found a small earth-warren dish with some food, and her sisters had set ready for her, but she did not touch it. And the next day she went out again with her goat, and left a few bits of broken bread which had been handed to her laying untouched. The first and second time that she did this, her sisters did not remark at all, but had happened every time they did observe, "There is something wrong about." Two Eyes is always leaving her food untasted, and she used to eat everything that we had given her. She must have discovered some other way of getting food. In order that they might learn the truth, they resolved to send One Eyes with Two Eyes when she went out to drive the goat to pasture, to observe what Two Eyes did, and when she was there, and whether or not anyone brought her any food or drink. And so Two Eyes set out again with One Eye with her. "And I will go with you to pasture," she said, "and see that the goat is being well taken for, and is being driven to where there is good food." But the Two Eyes knew that what was on One Eye's mind, and drove the goat into high grass, and said, "Come on, One Eye, we'll sit down, and I will sing something to you." One Eye sat down and was tired because she was unaccustomed to having to do chores and walk out in the heat of the sun. And so Two Eyes sang to her very consistently, "One eye wakest thou, one eye sleepest thou." And she repeated this until she fell asleep. And soon Two Eyes saw that One Eye was fast asleep and could discover nothing. She then turned to the little goat. "Bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat." And then she seated herself at her table and ate and drank until she was satisfied. And then she cried again, "Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take this table quite away." And it was gone in an instant. Two Eyes finally now awakened One Eye and said, "One Eye, you would want to take care of the goat and go to sleep while you're doing it, and in the meantime the goat could run away all over the world. "Come, let us go home again." And so they went home. And again Two Eyes left her little dish untouched, and One Eye could not tell her mother why she wouldn't eat it. Uh, and in an excuse to herself, she said, "I fell asleep when I was out." The next day, Mother said to Three Eyes, "This time you will go and observe what Two Eyes eats anything while she is out, and if anyone fetches her food and drink, for she must eat or drink in secret." And so Three Eyes went with Two Eyes and said, "I will go with you today and see if the goat is being properly taken care of and driven to where there is proper food." But Two Eyes knew what was on Three Eyes' mind, and drove the goat high into the grass. "We'll sit down and I will sing something to you, Three Eyes." Three Eyes sat down and was tired of all the walking in the heat, because she was not accustomed to having to do any chores as such. And Two Eyes began the same song as before. "Three Eyes, are you waking?" But then instead of singing, "Three Eyes, are you sleeping?" as she ought to have done, she thoughtlessly sang, "Two Eyes, are you sleeping?" And thus she sang, "Three Eyes, are you waking? Two Eyes, are you sleeping?" And two of the eyes that Three Eyes had soon fell asleep. But the third eye, having not being named in the song, did not sleep. And it was true that that as Three Eyes sat sleeping, and the third eye was awake and blinked and could see everything very well. And when Two Eyes thought that Three Eyes was fast asleep, she used her little charm. "Bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat." And she ate and drank as much as she desired, and then ordered the little table to go away again. "Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away." And Three Eyes had seen everything with her third eye that was awake. And when Two Eyes came to her and awoken her, "Have you been asleep, Three Eyes? Are you a good caretaker? Come, we will go home." And so they went home, and Two Eyes did not eat, and Three Eyes said to her mother, "Now I know why that high-minded thing sits there and does not eat. She is out there and says to the goat, 'Bleat, bleat, my little goat, bleat. Cover the table with something to eat.'" And then she magically has a table that appears with all the best food that is way better than anything we have here, and she eats all she wants. And when she is done, she says, "Bleat, bleat, my little goat, I pray, and take the table quite away." And then it all disappears. I watched everything closely. She put two of my eyes to sleep by using a certain form of words and charm, but luckily one of the eye on my forehead stayed awake. And then the envious mother cried, "Does thou want to fare better than we do? The desire shall pass away." And she fetched a butcher's knife, and thrust it into the heart of the goat, which then sadly fell down dead. When Two Eyes saw that she went out in full trouble, and seated herself on a ridge of grass near the edge of the field, and wept so bitterly in tears. Suddenly the wise woman appeared once more beside her, and said, "Two Eyes, why art thou weeping?" "I have not a reason to weep," she answered. "The goat which covered the table for me every day when I spoke the charm you taught me has been killed by my mother, and now I will never have anything to eat again, and I will have to bear hunger." The wise woman said to her, "Two Eyes, I will give you 3 pieces of good advice. Ask thy sisters to give thee the entrails of the slaughtered goat, and bury them in the middle of the house, and thy fortune will be made." And then she vanished, and Two Eyes went home and said to her sisters, "Dear sisters, please give me parts of my goat. I do not wish for what is good, but please give me the entrails." And they laughed and said, "Is that all you want? You can have it." And Two Eyes took the entrails and buried them very quietly in the evening in front of the house, just as the wise woman had counseled her to do. The next morning, when all awoke, she went out the house door, and there stood a seemingly magnificent tree, with all the leaves were silver, and there was fruit of gold hanging off the tree. And the most glorious and most precious thing in the entire world. They did not know how the tree could have come there during the night, but Two Eyes saw it and had grown out of the entrails of where the goat was buried, and for standing it was in the exact spot. And then the mother said to One Eye, "Climb, my child, and gather some of the fruit of the tree for us." And so One Eye climbed up to get as much of the golden apples as she could from the branches. But it happened that each time that she would try to climb, she could not pluck a single apple, and let her do as she might. And then the mother said, "Three Eyes, you can do better. Climb up the tree and see if you can look about better than your sister One Eye." And so One Eye slipped back down from the tree, and Three Eyes climbed up. Three Eyes was not more skillful, but try as she liked, the golden apples were always escaping her. At length the mother grew impatient and climbed up herself, but she could not get a hold of the fruit no better than One Eye or Three Eye, for she always clutched empty air. And then Two Eyes said, "I will go up perhaps, maybe I will succeed better." And her sisters cried, "Indeed, with your 2 eyes, what can you do better?" And Two Eyes climbed up, and the golden apples did not get out of her way. She was able to get up there and fill her hands to a cord, and was able to pluck one after another and fill her apron full. The mother took them away from her as soon as she got back down from the tree. And Two Eyes was any better for this. She said to One Eyes and Three Eyes, who were only envious, because Two Eyes alone had been able to get the fruit, and they still treated her so with cruelty. And it so happened that once they were all standing together by the tree, a young knight came passing by. "Quick, Two Eyes," cried the two sisters, "creep under this, don't disgrace us." And with all speed they turned an empty barrel in which they had been standing close by the tree, over poor Two Eyes, and they pushed the golden apples which she had been gathering under it too. And the knight came nearer. He was a very handsome lord, who stopped and admired the magnificent gold and silver tree. And he said to the two sisters, "To whom does this fine tree belong? Any who could bestow just one branch of it to me might in return ask for whatever he desired from me." And One Eye and Three Eyes replied that the tree belonged to them, and that they would give him a branch. But Goph took great trouble, and they weren't able to do it, for all the branches and fruit moved away from their touch. And then the knight said, "It is very strange that a tree should belong to you, and you would not be able to break a piece off." He then asserted that the tree was not their property, and they tried the contest. Two Eyes rolled out a couple of golden apples from under the barrel to the feet of the knight, and for when she vexed One Eye and Three Eye for not speaking the truth. And when the knight saw the apples he was astonished, and asked where they had come from. One Eye and Three Eyes answered that they had another sister, who was not allowed to show herself, for she only had 2 eyes like any common person. The knight, however, desired to see her, and cried, "Two Eyes, come forth." And then Two Eyes, quite comforted, came out from beneath the barrel. And the knight was surprised at her great beauty, and said, "Thou, Two Eyes, can certainly break off a branch of the tree for me?" "Yes," she said, "I certainly will be able to do so, for the tree belongs to me." And she climbed up, and with the greatest of ease was able to break off a branch of silver leaves and golden fruit, and gave it to the knight. And then the knight said, "Two Eyes, what shall I give thee for this?" "Alas," said Two Eyes, "I suffer from hunger and thirst and grief, and I want from early morning until late night. If you would take me with you and deliver me from these, I would be happy." And the knight lifted Two Eyes up upon his horse, and took her home to his father's castle. And there he gave her the most beautiful clothes and meat and drink, all to her heart's content. And he loved her, and he married her. And the wedding was celebrated with great joy. And when Two Eyes was thus carried away by the handsome knight, her two sisters grudged her for good fortune in downright earnest. The wonderful tree, however, remains with us, they thought, and even though they cannot gather no fruit from it, and everyone will stand and look at it and come and admire, who knows what good things may still be in store for us? But the next morning the tree had vanished, with all their hopes were at an end. And when Two Eyes looked out of her window from her little room in the castle, much to her great delight, the tree had followed her, and it was standing out in front. Two Eyes lived there in great long happiness. And once two poor women came to her to the castle and begged her for gifts. She looked down and she recognized their faces as her sisters, One Eye and Three Eyes, who had fallen into such poverty that they had to wander and beg for bread from door to door. Two Eyes, however, made them welcome, and was very kind to them, and took care of them and their hearts, even though they were filled with evil that they had done to their sister in their youth. Next, I will read a rather short one to finish. This one is entitled The Owl. 200 or 300 years ago, when people were far from being so crafty and cunning as they are nowadays, an extraordinary event took place in a little town. By some mischance, one of the great owls, called horned owls, had come from the neighboring woods into the barn, and one of the townsfolk, in the night time, when day broke, dared not venture forth again from her retreat, for fear that other birds, which raised a terrible outcry whenever she appeared. In the morning, the manservant went into the barn to fetch some straw, and he was so mightily alarmed at the sight of the owl sitting in the corner that he ran away and announced to his master that a monster like that he had never seen he had set eyes upon his life, and which could devour a man with the slightest difficulty, was sitting in the barn, rolling his eyes about his head. "I know you already," said the master, "and you have courage enough to chase a blackbird from the fields. And when you see a dead hen lying, you have to get a stick before you can go near it. I must go and see for myself what kind of monster this is," added the master. And he went quite boldly into the barn and looked around him. And when he, however, saw the strange grim creature with his own eyes, he was no less terrified than the servant had been. And with 2 bounds he sprang and ran to his neighbors, and begged them imploringly to lend assistance against the unknown dangerous beast, or else the whole town might be in danger. And if there were to break loose of the barn, that it would be where it was to be shut up. A great noise and clamor arose in the streets, and the townsmen came, with spears and hay-forks and scythes and axes, as if they were going after a great beast. And finally the senators appeared with a burgomaster at their head. And when they had drawn up the marketplace, they marched to the barn and surrounded it by all sides. Thereupon one of the most courageous among them stepped forth and entered with long spear furrowed. And he began running out immediately afterwards with a shriek, as pale as death, and he could not utter but a single word. And yet 2 others ventured in, and they fared no better. At last stepped a fourth, a young strong man, who was famous for his warlike deeds, and he said, "You will not drive away the monster by merely looking at him. We must be earnest, and I see that you have all turned into women, and none of you dares encounter the animal." He ordered them to give him some armor and sword, and he brought a great spear and armed himself, and pressed his courage, though many feared for his life. And when the 2 barn doors were opened great and wide, he saw the owl, and in the meantime had perched herself in the middle of the great cross beam. He had a ladder brought, and when he raised it, he made his climb up to the top of the beam. And they all cried out to him as if he was to be a bear himself and bravely, and commended him to be like St. George who slew the dragon. And when he had gone to the top, the owl perceived that he had designs for her, and was also so bewildered by the crowd and shouting, and knew not how to escape. She rolled her eyes, and ruffled her feathers, and flapped her wings, and snapped her beak, and cried, "To hoot, to hoot!" in a harsh voice. "Strike home, strike home!" screamed the crowd outside to the valiant hero. "And any one who is standing where I am standing," he answered, "would not cry 'strike home.'" And he certainly did plant his foot on one ring of the ladder, and then he began to tremble, half fainting, and went back again. And now there is no one left who dared to put himself in such danger. The monster, they say, had poisoned and mortally wounded even the very strongest among them, by snapping at him, and just by breathing at him. And so who are we to risk our lives, they said. They took counsel for what they ought to do to prevent the whole town from being destroyed. And for a long time everything seemed to be of no use, and at great length the burgomaster found an apparent. "My opinion," he said, "is that we ought to, in commonplace purse, to pay for this barn, and whatsoever corn or straw it contains within, and thus indemnity the owner, and then burn down the whole building, and the terrible beast with it. And thus no one will have to endanger his life, and no one, in time for thinking of great expense, would be ill appeared." All agreed with him, and so they set fire to the barn itself, in all four corners. And sadly the owl was burnt miserably. Let lay any one who does not believe it go thither and inquire for himself. I hope by now you are resting nicely and can sleep well. If you have not fallen asleep yet, there should be 2 other videos at this point that have been posted. Try to make a playlist of them and listen to it until you can fall asleep. I hope you drift off happily to Nina Nana Land and have happy dreams.